everyone, and welcome back to this week's lesson of Sunday School. We've been looking at Corinth this month, and over the weeks you've been hearing many different things about Corinth. We've learned that it had ports and marketplaces for trading. We've learned about the vegetation. We've learned about the plants and the trees. And last week we learned about the pets and the animals of Corinth. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the people of Corinth through the journeys of the Apostle Paul. Where do we read about this? Well, we've been reading from Acts chapter 18, where Paul met Aquila and Priscilla. And because they were of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked because they were both tent makers. And then the Bible goes on to tell us in verse 4 that Paul preached to the Jews and the Greeks in the synagogue. Paul begins his time in Corinth working as a tent maker in the week and preaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath. This was really interesting because Paul didn't just preach to the people, he also worked amongst the people. And we'll see later on that Paul loved the people so much that he didn't just visit there. His missionary journey caused him to stay there for a considerable amount of time because his heart was for the people, because it was fueled by God's passion and love for humanity. Number 2, Paul established a church in Corinth on his second missionary journey. From Corinth, Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. After the Jews reject the message in Corinth, Paul begins to preach to the Gentiles in the same city, and he stayed there for a year to 18 months. Why is it important to understand this information? Well, Paul gives us a little bit of an insight into the people of Corinth. And we can see when, and you'll see references later in your homework section, that Paul said to the people, not many of you were born of a noble birth. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were wise according to human standards. This gives us a little bit of an insight into the people of Corinth, that although there were some people who were wealthy, there were many who had little to no wealth at all. And although some people were of notoriety and powerful and maybe had influence, there were many people who had little to no influence at all. And although some may have been highly educated, many may have had little to no education. But the gospel message of Jesus Christ was for everyone. And Paul stayed amongst the people of Corinth to ensure that he delivered exactly what God wanted these people to hear. The message of salvation. The people of Corinth consisted of Jews and many Gentiles, and the people of Corinth were heavily influenced by the society and culture around them. Paul wanted to help the people of Corinth to mature in their relationship and devotion to God. Paul shows us through his life that when your life is surrendered to God, God can use the so-called big things and the small things. Paul did not allow the negative things in his life to stop him from fulfilling God's mission. And we'll see more about that shortly. What is God trying to tell us through this story? Well, Paul was a man on a mission from God, but this mission was fueled by God's love. And because of God's love, Paul was enabled to love the people. We can see from Paul's life that he did not limit his God-enriched life to just preaching on the Sabbath, but used all of his time and every opportunity to fulfill God's mission. What can we learn from all of this information we've just taken in? Well, 3 things. 1, there are many different methods by which God's work is accomplished, and there is much work for us to do. When we look at Paul's life, we can see 3 things which people will call talents or gifts or skills. Firstly, we see that Paul used his mouth to preach, as we saw that he preached on the Sabbath, but he also used his hands as a tent maker to use his skills in the week. But he also used his mind and his hand to write letters, as we saw that he wrote letters or epistles to the people in Thessalonica. As we said earlier, he wrote 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians from Corinth. But amongst all of those skills, talents and abilities, Paul used 3 things that any of us can use. And it's something that you have and it's something that I have. And we all have the ability to use it in any environment that we're in. So those three things are this. Number one, he used faithfulness. He was faithful to God. And if we are faithful to God, we will see the fruits of that faithfulness. And we definitely saw that in Paul's life, as his faithfulness to God was poured out in integrity and faith among the people. Two, Paul served God. He used all of his abilities and everything that he had to serve God. And because of that, he was able to serve the people. And you'll see in some of the verses in your homework that why Paul served God and what happened when Paul served God and served the people. And number three, Paul was filled with love for the people. But this love was fueled by God's passion and love for humanity. So these three things we all can do by being faithful, by having God's love and having a heart of service. We should never limit what God can do through us, be it small or great, but we should use all of our time and our talent to serve God. And number three, when one door closes, we can ask God where the open door of opportunity is. Paul loved the Jewish people so much, but he was rejected, or his message, God's message, was rejected by the Jews in Corinth, by many of the Jews in Corinth. But this didn't deter Paul. He went through the open door that he had to share the gospel or the good news with those who would listen. Well, that's it for this week. And I know I've given you a lot of information to think about. For your homework, I would like you to look up a tent. You can even type in the word, it's on the screen now, Bedouin tent. So this will be like kind of tent dwellers, but it might just give you a good picture of what a tent looks like. And in your homework sheet, I would like you to either draw that tent that you find or write a description. So when you're writing the description of the tent, it could be how high the tent is, what colors were on the tent. You can even make some up. What materials were used to in this tent, all of the different details. So for those of you who want to draw, you can draw. For those of you who want to write something, you can do so also. And if you really, really want to, you can draw and write something. Secondly, I would like you to reflect back on 2 activities that Paul did when he was in Corinth. So I mentioned about 3 a few moments ago, but if you can remember 2 things that Paul did, or talents or gifts he used, or things that he done while he was in Corinth. And if you need something to jog your memory, read through Acts chapter 18, verse 1 to 4, and you will see some of the things that Paul did. And if you read 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 to 23, you will see everything that motivated Paul and the reason why he did all the things that we just spoke about. And on your homework sheet, I would like you to write down those 2 things that you found, those 2 activities that Paul done, or the 2 things that Paul done while he was in Corinth. Well, that's all for this week. But until the next time, take care and God bless.